Good morning. My name is Scott Litkey, and I am the director of the Institute for Holocaust Education. Welcome to our monthly IHE Third Thursday Lunch and Learn. We are honored today to have Professor Mike Kelly from Creighton University's Law School with us. Professor Kelly coordinates the International and Comparative Law program at Creighton University, including its nationally ranked summer program on international criminal law and the Holocaust in Germany, from the trip called the Holocaust in Germany from Nuremberg to The Hague. He is the past president of the U.S. National Chapter and currently a member of the board of directors of the Association International du Droit Penal, which I'm sure I just butchered.
Your French is excellent.
Yeah, thank you. A Paris-based Society of International Criminal Lawyers, Judges and Attorneys, founded in 1924, that enjoys consultative status with the United Nations. His research and teaching focuses on the fields of international and comparative law and Native American law. He is currently the author and co-author of 7 books and over 40 articles. His widely cited work is among the top 3% downloaded from the Social Science Research Network. And Professor Kelly will be sharing with us about the Nuremberg to The Hague program, which IHE is honored to be a part of. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Professor Kelly.
Thank you, Scott. And hello, everyone. It's good to see you. I am going to talk to you a bit about the program itself, but I'm going to do this in the context of taking you on a journey with me today on the road to international criminal justice. And we're going to begin in the Holocaust era on that journey, and then we'll end up in Ukraine today. And Creighton Law School in particular has been on this journey since the inception of international criminal law as a discipline. You're all aware that the post-World War II Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals were the founding institutional developments for how to prosecute war crimes, crimes against humanity, later genocide, aggression, what they referred to back then, crimes against peace. And Creighton had a stake in this process at the very beginning. One of our alumni from the class of 1930, Bob Delaney, was the deputy prosecutor in Tokyo of Hideki Tojo, the prime minister. And we have his papers in our rare book collection at Creighton Law School. And so the Blue Jays, were at this in the beginning. We currently have a judge in The Hague. His name's Charlie Smith, class of 1970. And he is a judge on the Kosovo War Crimes Tribunal. And he meets with our current Blue Jays when we go over there. So Creighton as a law school has been and is part of this whole process. And this was pointed out to me in 2011. In 2011, I was working with some folks at the JCC, Beth, who I see is here, and Alan Potash, about how to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the trial of Adolf Eichmann, because we felt that this was an important thing to do. And I was also in cross conversation with Alan Gold at Loyola Law School in LA, because they wanted to do something too. Alan had just founded a Genocide and Holocaust Center. And so we decided to bring over from Jerusalem my friend Gabriel Bach, who had retired as a justice on the Israeli Supreme Court. And the reason we wanted Gabriel to come over to both LA and Omaha was because he was the deputy prosecutor of Adolf Eichmann in 1961. And we wanted him to really talk about how foundational this was in the annals of international criminal justice and how it brought the promise of Nuremberg forward beyond the 1945-46 period and gave it life during that critical Cold War period when really nothing else much was happening due to the freeze between the United States and the Soviet Union. And so he did. Gabriel and Ruthie got on a flight, came to Omaha, spent a few days with us, and then went on to LA and did the same thing. And he gave a riveting lecture, and he met with survivors, specifically Sam Freed and B. Karp, who had waited a very long time to thank this man for prosecuting the architect of the Holocaust. And that, of course, was a cathartic moment for everybody. And after his third day with us, before he was ready to depart to move on in his program, he turned to the dean and myself, Marianne Culhane at the time, and said, "All right, now what are you going to do? This has been great, but what are you going to do? I'm 84. These survivors are in their 90s. What are you going to do? It's up to the next generation." And so my dean said, "Okay, Mike, let's do something, hatch a plan." And I did. I got on the phone with Mike Baszler at Chapman Law School, who holds the Holocaust Studies chair there in Los Angeles. I talked to Professor Sean Watts, who was on the faculty at Creighton. I talked to John Barrett, who's on the faculty at St. John's Law School and is the foremost authority on Justice Robert Jackson, who was the fellow who founded the Nuremberg Tribunal and led the US prosecution. I talked to Mike Bryant at Bryant University, who from a historical perspective is probably the main authority on the other Nuremberg trials that happened after the big one. And I talked to Christoph Safferling, who is Germany's foremost expert on the Nuremberg trial in particular, and the post-Holocaust era German restoration efforts in their judicial system. And we put together this program, which I have up here. It's called the Nuremberg to the Hague program. And it takes place in Nuremberg for the same reason that Justice Jackson selected Nuremberg for the post-World War II prosecution of Nazi war criminals. The symbolism is incredibly important. You're all aware from German history that Nuremberg was the birthplace and the beating heart of National Socialism. And so by prosecuting these folks after the fact in Nuremberg, symbolically at least, Jackson thought, you're putting a knife in the heart of National Socialism. And so we chose Nuremberg because that's where this area of law was born, and because through Chris's good offices, we had access to a university, Friedrich Alexander University, which hosts us while we're there. And we take 30 law students every year. About a little over half of them are from Creighton Law School. The rest come from all over the country, Texas, California, Massachusetts, Florida, Oregon. And I think that's a real testament to the quality of the program that we have. And so we spend the entire month of July in Europe, based in Nuremberg. That's our home base. And from there, we have local field trips to the rally grounds, to Dachau, to all of the other areas around Nuremberg that were important during that time, including the Grand Hotel is still standing, where the American prosecution staff stayed during their time there, and to the courtroom. And so because we have access to the courtroom, students actually get to see where the trial unfolded. And sometimes John, sometimes myself, we walk them through all of this. Sitting on top of that, we have, with the Nuremberg Principals Academy, a moot court program. And the moot court program draws teams from 50 different countries. And it's always either a war crimes or genocide problem. And it's hosted in Nuremberg. And actual judges come down from The Hague to, judge these students. And these law students have the opportunity, if they, get to the semifinal rounds and the final rounds, to present their arguments in courtroom 600. So they can literally stand where Jackson stood when he was cross-examining Reichsmarshal Goering and deliver an argument in front of a judge from The Hague. That opportunity is so heavy with history and so incredibly important for these students that it really is worth the price of admission to watch it. So even though Nuremberg is our home base, we have spokes of the wheel that go out from Nuremberg to continue the educational immersion aspect Creighton is all about educational immersion. Larry knows this from his trip to the Dominican Republic, right? We try to immerse people in places where things are happening. So from a legal perspective, when we're dealing with crimes, we want to immerse students in an area where a conspiracy happened, because you prosecute the intent of the criminal, right? The mental element. We want to immerse students into a crime scene from the Holocaust. And then we want to immerse students into courts where things are currently happening. So one trip we take is up to Berchtesgaden. We go up to Hitler's Eagle's Nest, which survived the war. And that was one of the sites of the conspiracy for the final solution. And that's the beginning of the crime, when the criminal begins hatching the plan. So from a lawyer's perspective, it's important to kind of understand where that was happening. Then we take them to the crime scene. We take them out to Auschwitz, and we spend 3 days there, now 4 days. And they have an immersive experience in Krakow. They visit not only the camp for a whole day, but the Jewish Museum, the Galicia Museum. They spend time in the Jewish Quarter. They spend time at the Schindler Factory. We have faculty not only from Chapman, Dr. Basler, but from Jagiellonian University. The head of the Jewish Studies department comes and hosts the students. And they get to understand not only the crime scene, but the context in which the crime took place. And then we take them to Nuremberg, where the crime was prosecuted. And then we take them to The Hague, and they spend time in The Hague and visit war crimes tribunals there, and sit in on hearings and talk to judges and prosecutors. And what they can do is they can see how these prosecution theories have changed from 1945 to 2022. Sometimes the evidentiary showing has changed. Certainly the penalty phase has changed from death to life sentencing, and all of the things that prosecutors and judges have to contend with. So it's really living law, even though they have a historical perspective on it. And that arc, I think, is what they have told me, at least over the years, becomes transformative for them, not only about their thinking, but how they approach life. And we did, right before COVID, reach out to Scott Litkey at IHE through the good offices of Howard Epstein, to one of our law grads, to try to figure out how we could bridge some of our programming with the Jewish community in Omaha. And Scott was incredibly receptive, and through some funding from the Stanberg Foundation, through the Jewish Federation Foundation, we were able to build this bridge that brings Scott with us, actually, for the Krakow and Auschwitz portion of the trip, and a little bit of the Nuremberg portion, so that he can help some of the students understand what's happening and what they're feeling and what they can do about it, but also to share the experience with them. Because when these students come back, we want them to be part of the IHE programming here in Omaha. And one of the reasons that we felt this was so important is because you look genealogically at where we are with survivors at this point. Child survivors now are in their 90s, if they're still alive at all. And so to the extent that they can go out and talk about what happened to them and witness what happened to them, that's becoming less and less of a possibility. We need to start relying upon second generation and third generation testimonies. But what Creighton is doing, along with IHE, is we're creating 30 new witnesses every year through this program, these young law students. They're coming back understanding what happened at that area in Poland. They crunched on the same gravel. They walked the same areas. They spent time in the barracks. And they got the theoretical and the educational and pedagogical component through our faculty there. And so they're committed to understanding what happened, but they're also committed to combating Holocaust denialism, because we teach about that too. And when you look at the trend lines, especially in the last 5 or 6 years of what's happening not only in the United States, but around the world with the rising tide of anti-Semitism, you might wonder, okay, well, how is this connected? And I have always said, and Scott's heard me say this before, Holocaust denialism walks in the shadow of anti-Semitism. It's all part of it. And driving that point home to our students and having them participate in IHE programming, especially with the secondary education students in Omaha, I think is vital because it's demonstrative. It shows people how these young law students are approaching the world, and it tucks nicely into Creighton's Jesuit mission. So, so the support has been incredible for this program, and it has only built out since we founded it. Every year it builds out a little bit further. Last year, we had 2 Ukrainian lawyers come up from Kiev and talk to our students. And that was so impactful for them to understand that they are literally in Krakow, sitting 500 miles away from an area where war crimes are happening in real time. And what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? And because of the impact of that experience last year, and Scott was there for that, we're now trying to build out a whole extra day just to unpack Ukraine while we're in Krakow because of our proximity to, the atrocities that are happening there, not only physically, but also where this lands in the historical arc, right? Are war crimes going to roll into some kind of genocide? When do we cross that line? How do we cross it? Where are the accountability factors? What do you do with prisoners of war if you are the Ukrainian military? Well, that depends. Are you capturing actual Russian soldiers proper, or are you capturing private groups that are contracted with the Russian state? That makes a huge difference. And so, these young lawyers are going to be trying to apply what they're learning to something that's unfolding right now. And that's where we get into our discussion of the Ukraine on this journey of international criminal justice. How do you hold individuals accountable that commit crimes like the Holocaust, like war crimes and crimes against humanity? Well, there's a structure for it. There's a framework for it, and we go back to Nuremberg for this. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of luck that's involved in it, and that can't be discounted. So when we look at the Holocaust and the crimes coming out of World War II, yes, we were lucky, I suppose, in a sense, as the Allied powers, to get our hands on some key figures that we could prosecute. The main figures obviously eluded us through their own hand. But nevertheless, precedent was laid to the extent we have precedent in international law on how to do this. Israel got lucky with respect to capturing Eichmann. There was a lot of back end things that had to happen with Israeli intelligence in Argentina. And I remember Justice Bach telling me that in real time, when they decided to go ahead and capture Eichmann, they had a very difficult decision to make because Mossad had been tracking him, and he was supposed to be at a meeting outside of Buenos Aires with Josef Mengele. And they waited and they waited, and Mengele never showed up. And so they had to make the decision. Bird in the hand, right? Do you go ahead and capture Eichmann, or do you let him get away and try again? And they decided to go ahead and take him, and of course they never got Mengele. So there's luck involved in this, and some hard decisions. With respect to Ukraine, how do you get your hands on Vladimir Putin and his gang for the war crimes that are happening there? Well, again, there are frameworks, and Putin and his gang assumed that they were immune from those frameworks. The chief one is this body known as the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court sits in The Hague. It was founded in 2000 all of the negotiations were all in the 1990s. Ben Ferenz, who is the last surviving prosecutor from Nuremberg, was instrumental in pushing for it and getting it set up. Ben, who is 102 years old now and just won the Congressional Gold Medal, is in Florida, but still active in this area. And the thing about the International Criminal Court is that it can have jurisdiction even when it doesn't. Now that might not make sense, but here's how it works. The International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. If you're a member state, party to the court statute, or if the perpetrators are nationals of a member state. And that's the baseline jurisdiction. But the court can have jurisdiction if a state voluntarily exceeds to it on a case-by-case basis. Now, neither Ukraine nor Russia belong to the International Criminal Court. They haven't, ratified the Rome Statute or anything. And this is why Moscow, I'm sure, thought that they were immune from its jurisdiction. But in 2014, Putin decided he was going to snatch Crimea. And in the process of doing that, the militia and soldiers that were associated with the Russian forces committed some atrocities. And so the Ukrainian government asked the International Criminal Court to extend jurisdiction over what Russians were doing in Ukraine when Crimea was taken from them. And this triggered what's known as a preliminary examination. And in the ICC world, a preliminary examination is the phase of a case or a situation where the prosecutor begins collecting evidence and tries to understand if there's enough to bring a case. And so all this information is coming in. There's fact finding, on the ground, witnesses are being interviewed, et cetera. And preliminary examinations go on for years and years. It's a slow moving process. And the former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court was involved in this preliminary examination process with Ukraine from 2015 onwards, and had not completed it before she left office. And so it was still an open examination. So when the new prosecutor came on board, Karim Khan, former barrister from London, and Russia rolled its tanks into Ukraine, he realized that Russia had rolled its tanks into an open preliminary examination at the ICC. And so they had rolled themselves into the ICC's jurisdiction inadvertently. And he very quickly found that war crimes had happened and turned this examination into an investigation. And when that switch flips from an examination to an investigation, then we're starting to get serious about the ICC asserting jurisdiction over whatever war criminals it can get its hands on. Because then you have a 3-judge panel that comes into existence. A preliminary examination panel turns into a pre-trial chamber. And these judges can issue arrest warrants against individuals that committed the war crimes and begin the cases. We have, a group, quite a large group in Ukraine who are POWs and who could be amenable to this jurisdiction. But what about the big guy? What about Putin? Well, here's the thing about dictators. Sometimes you can get your hands on them, again, if you're lucky, if they're overthrown. If they're not overthrown, it's not likely you're ever going to get them. But if they're overthrown from within, then you can. And we've seen this play out in Yugoslavia when Slobodan Milosevic was ousted from office. We saw this play out in Sudan when Omar al-Bashir was ousted from office after the Sudanese Civil War. And the thing is, when dictators are ousted, sometimes the replacement government decides that it's worth it to hand over the former dictator in exchange for the country being reintegrated back into international society and international economics. And certainly that was the case in Serbia. The replacement government decided, okay, you really want Slobodan Milosevic, we'll give him to you. They sent him to the Hague. And then Serbia began to be reintegrated, sanctions were lifted into European society. We saw this with Sudan. Right now, they're negotiating al-Bashir's transfer to the Hague in exchange for sanctions being lifted on Sudan and Sudan reintegrating. This very likely would have happened with Libya, but when Muammar al-Gaddafi was overthrown, he didn't survive the overthrow process, right? He died. He was killed during the overthrow. Even though there was an arrest warrant out for him from the ICC, and he probably would have gone to the Hague if he had survived the overthrow process. So with Putin, first of all, there has to be an overthrow, which is a tall order anyway, because he kind of does control social media in that country. So there's got to be an overthrow. Although we have seen overthrows happen in Russia before. Historically, they've happened quite a lot. And then, of course, at the end of the Gorbachev era, there was an attempted coup as well. So it can happen. So first of all, there has to be an overthrow. Second of all, the dictator has to survive the overthrow process and be taken into custody in that jurisdiction. That again is kind of lucky. Thirdly, the replacement government has to decide that it's worth it for them to play this chip, to hand over the former dictator in exchange for reintegrating that society back into the international fold, sanctions being lifted, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of dominoes have to fall in precisely the right order for dictators to meet justice in the Hague, and it's not at all guaranteed that ever happens. But when it does, then you can really have a situation where you've got some kind of meaningful justice delivered on behalf of humanity. And really, that's what we're looking at. That's what Robert Jackson argued before the bench in Nuremberg. He says, I'm not standing here in front of you, right, the four judges, seeking to prosecute these Nazi leaders. Humanity is standing here before you. Humanity is at the bar, right, trying to deliver international justice against all of these individuals. So that's the journey that we're taking in partnership with the JCC and the IHE, Creighton Law School, to bring international criminal justice into some kind of a usable framework from a historical perspective, and in a way that changes the lives of those who participate in the program meaningfully, so that they can then give back to society in all kinds of ways. It's that ripple effect that we're trying to really kind of engender through this process. Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Professor Kelly. It's nice also to see a lot of your students, and some of the students from last year are now online with us. Thank you for being here. Has there been any tracking of the students as far as since the conception of the program, as far as with what they learned going into this field, or just saying, coming back and saying that as a result of this class, this program, such and such happened?
Yeah, we've been, since we've been doing this for a decade, we see them all. And in fact, a lot of the alumni who have gone on the program are beginning to beat down the door to try to come back. So the interest remains there. And we do have an N2H Facebook page where you see a lot of cross traffic and cross conversation happening. I'll share another screen here with you. This is our program flyer that shows you all the different places we go to, from here in Nuremberg up into the Alps, over to the Hague. There's the International Criminal Court behind our class from last year, it looks like. And then, of course, there's the students kind of surrounding the crematoria at Auschwitz-Birkenau 2, I believe.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions for Professor Kelly? And please feel free to just take yourself off mute, ask the questions.
I've got one in the chat.
Thank you. It seems that the need for an insurrection overthrow is incredibly restrictive, a high bar. Would you talk more about that?
Yeah, it is a high bar. Part of it is that there needs to be a critical mass of individuals that are willing to stand up and put themselves at risk in order to lead a change in their own society. Oftentimes, they're not doing it on behalf of others, on behalf of what's happening to others outside their own society. And so there is a bit of self-interest involved in this. But when does that tipping point happen, when things get so bad within your society that you're willing to risk an overthrow? And that's going to be different society to society. So unfortunately, the very unsatisfactory answer to your question is that cultural relativism underlies all of that calculation that society is going to make about whether it's going to overthrow its leaders or not. And so that's going to change situation by situation. It's a high bar in every situation.
And Steve Weiss just posted that tonight out of Illinois at the Holocaust Museum at 6:15 Central, they are showing a new movie, The Lost Eichmann Tapes. And
Progress.
I'm sorry, something just happened there, but if anybody would like the link to it, if you can't find it, you can contact IHE. We'll be happy to get that for you. Other questions? Steve, please go ahead.
Mike, I'm a member of the governance board. Excuse me, telemarketer. I'm a member of the governance board of IHE. I'm a second generation speaker. And I'm really impressed with what you're doing with the law students. Do you have any involvement with the medical school curriculum, teaching the Holocaust and the Nuremberg trials?
No, I don't. I mean, I know some medical school faculty, but I'm not aware that they're doing any programming over there. They might be.
Would you be willing to sit down with me and discuss this further?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. To the extent we can bring in other disciplines, it really can be an enriching process. About 5 years ago now, maybe 6, we had a nursing student who wanted to go on this program because she was, fascinated by it, and she'd always, wanted to learn more about it, but the nursing curriculum didn't offer that opportunity. And so the dean of the nursing school, allowed her to come and get credit. And instead of taking law school exams for the classes, she wrote research papers, on the Mengele experiments from a medical perspective and all of that. And there was a particular moment when we were at Auschwitz-Birkenau II, and there's, if you haven't been there, there's miles and miles of barracks, and we happened to be over by a particular one, something like number 224 or something, and it was next to one that she had done some research on ahead of our trip, and she gathered all of the law students and the professors over to this other barracks, and half of it was gone. Part of it was still there, and they kind of stood in the entryway, and she told them the story about the inmates of that particular barracks and how there had been an outbreak of typhoid in 1943, late 1943. And the staff at the camp, took a hands-off approach to this. In fact, the guards wouldn't even go near the building because they didn't want to get sick. And so it was up to, the Jewish inmates of this particular barracks to take care of themselves. And she taught the students about what they had to do and what was available to them in an extermination camp to care for one another and get as many of them to survive this outbreak in this particular unit while they were in isolation as they could, and which ones came out and which ones survived and actually talked about it. And so there was this magical moment in the middle of a black spot on the earth where a nursing student was teaching law students about humanity and about what had to happen for survivability in that particular instance and the role that hope plays for all of us. And so, Steve, I am totally on board with getting other disciplines involved in this if we can.
There was an incredible webinar presentation, I think maybe still this week, possibly last week, a movie produced by the nursing faculty, I think at Southwestern Medical School in Texas. And the title of it is The Killing Nurses of the Third Reich. It was absolutely stunning and eye-opening. I think it's available. You can go through the museum on YouTube, Museum of Jewish Heritage. I'd recommend.
Actually, there's two parts to that, Steve, because you shared it. There's the movie that came out a few years ago, and then there's also a follow-up now discussion from a couple weeks ago.
Right.
And Mike, I'd be happy to share it with you. I just started the discussion. I finished the movie. It's fascinating. It's again a lot on what you're saying about responsibility and moral culpability.
Mike, can you share with me your email address so I can?
Absolutely. Yep. I'll put it here in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. I'll get in touch with you.
Are there other questions?
Scott, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead, Sharon.
I'm concerned in general about our public education system in many states, as all of these very vocal parents want to ban certain things or have the ability to pull their children out of certain programs, certain subject areas, if certain things are being taught about which they vehemently disagree or for whatever reasons they have, which are crazy. I never thought about it until I was listening to Mike talking about training this generation of people to be able to go into the schools and have these, young lawyers do this. And I thought, wow, have we had instances in schools where school districts, teachers have informed us that parents didn't want their children involved in the classroom?
I can say on our end, we have not had that. What we have had more than anything is just that there's a need for, and this is what we're trying to assist with, for the development of the materials to be used, the curricular needs. The new legislation at this point just says that we should teach about the Holocaust and other genocides. What we're working with, actually, the Nebraska consortium of teachers and through some other means are, okay, it says that, now what does that mean? Also, as a side note, through lots of on our end, through our programs that we do in the schools, such as the Anne Frank traveling exhibit, the essay contest, the art in the Holocaust, we hope to enrich that area of education. The greater need is, I would say, teachers knowing where to start and knowing what to do and use, and that's one thing that in the conception, I think, of IHE, that's one of the reasons that it was started, was in order to assist teachers.
No, I'm aware that IHE is doing a phenomenal job in getting programs in the schools, but I didn't think about it until very recently when I'm listening to these crazy people who don't want their children, they want their children pulled out for an hour on Thursdays if the teacher is talking about this, that, or the other thing.
Well, what we've seen more on a national level are things like somebody will say something about a book that's out there and why it shouldn't be taught, dealing with the Holocaust, whether it be Maus, the graphic novel, whether it be Frank at some point. What typically has happened is, I had a discussion about this actually with my father-in-law. I find it interesting when it happens because it also ends up, in a sense, not backfiring, but it doesn't work that way. And as a result, all the positive reasons of why those materials should be used comes out. And in most cases, in many cases, wherever this has happened, there has been this backtracking of now saying, well, not that we didn't mean what we said, we're not going to act that way.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mike? Well, I can tell you that we are hoping in the summer of 2025, which will be the 80th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials, to be partnering with the program that we're doing now and having a component of members of our community, both Creighton alumni from the law school and other members of the community, to kind of piggyback on some of this. I got to witness part of that last year with the California Bar Association and a group of judges. And it's a wonderful program. And we hope to this fall, even though it'll be a year and a half later from that, but to announce that we'll be doing that.
Right, and that's to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Nuremberg trial. For the 75th, we had the California Judges Association and the Los Angeles County Bar Association join us, as well as the Dean of the Law School and the Deputy Mayor of Nuremberg and various other individuals. And so we had a commemoration event that kind of featured all of the faculty. Scott, some people called it an all-star lineup. and really kind of brought it home to folks, and so the visitors get to actually see some of the things the students get to see. They get to go to Krakow, they get to spend some time at the museum, they get to go to the camp, they get to go to the courtroom in Nuremberg, they get to tour all these other areas, in addition to alumni kinds of things. And then everybody descends on the Grand Hotel for the programming, in the Altstadt for the city. So experientially, it really is kind of a fantastic opportunity, not only to take a great trip, right, to this part of Europe, which on its own is really an amazing experience if you've ever done one of these trips, but then also to have this substantive component to it that weaves through your journey in this part of Europe. And Scott did that with us last year. So we have actually a really good template for what this would look like for folks.
Other questions? Just going to go through quickly, make sure I don't see anyone with their hand up. Professor Mike Kelly, thank you very much. Those of you may also recognize him. He's always in the halls of the Jewish Community Center. His kids are frequent users of all.
I'm there every day.
Every day, which is very, very nice. Next month, we are honored to have the new executive director of the Bach Museum, part of UNO, is going to present on Samuel Bach and what the museum itself holds for our community. So we're excited about that. And if you'd like any more information on today on IHE's involvement, Professor Kelly and Creighton, there's a website. We'll be happy to provide you with that. I know there's a group that came on late. There will be a recording up on the YouTube page for the Jewish Federation of Omaha. I'll send actually the link to your contact person. It'll be up probably tomorrow, Monday at the latest. And so you can see the part that you missed. And Professor Kelly, as always, thank you. And thank you for including IHE in this partnership. It's absolutely been amazing. And as we say, actually, may we go from strength to strength.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for being here.